He took part in our government. He took part in it, okay, all the way up through his own presidency. Madison, to me, depicted, okay, the epitome of someone who believes in something, works for it, but also accepts the fact that sometimes you can't get it exactly the way you want.
I guess I took the fact that that was an integral part of my curriculum for granted, because I think it's absolutely crucial. Not only does it give students a sense of where we came from and why we got here, but I think it gives them an ability to think a little bit more critically, where other subject areas may not necessarily encourage that type of analytical thinking. I guess what I'm thinking of is taking these that historical knowledge and applying it to current events and seeing how things change over time, and that's totally different from just memorizing a bunch of formulas and equations and being able to spit that back out. And I think students can only acquire that kind of critical thinking by really bantering about the past choices that people have made in society and the repercussions that have come along with those. I think a working knowledge of U.S. history is absolutely imperative to being an active citizen. It's important to be able to read a newspaper or watch a TV broadcast and actually think critically about what's being said to you, instead of just absorbing it and developing an opinion on it and finding out where you stand. And that transcends all the way to the voting booth, and we all know that we want to have good voter turnout. We also want people to be making informed choices, and I think that education in history and in civic education is the only way to start influencing people to make those choices and to ingrain it in their sense of duty to as Americans. I think that's the only way that we can get there, to have an informed citizenry.
It's interesting that the question regarding the decision to have the portraits of Abraham Lincoln and George Washington in every classroom in the school. We actually have the portrait that sits in the National Portrait Gallery of Abraham Lincoln. He's seated and leaning slightly forward, and then we have some of the Gilbert Stuart portraits of George Washington. And earlier this year, the Lieutenant Governor Murray visited the school, and when he was touring the school, one of the first questions he asked me was exactly that: why do you have the pictures of Washington and Lincoln? And my quick answer was, well, Washington founded the country and Lincoln saved the Republic. So he nodded his head. That seemed to be a pretty good answer. But I think that in a general sense, we want the students to be familiar with a number of figures that played seminal roles in the country's founding and the continuance of the country. But those two individuals in particular seem to occupy a special place. What elements of the founding documents matter most to me, and which figures are most important to me in the founding? I would say that one of the elements that matters most to me would be the Bill of Rights. Again, we emphasize this at the school by having a copy of the Constitution hanging in every classroom and marking the Constitution Day every year. But in our civics classes, especially at the high school level, we go through in detail the Bill of Rights and the process for amending the Constitution. And I think the guarantee in the Bill of Rights for the individual citizen's right, the right to assemble and the right to practice one's religion, and the freedom of speech, these are essential rights that really mark America out as a distinctive country and a sort of an example, I think, for many other countries. I'm also a big admirer of Abigail Adams, and I think she was a tremendous woman, a very wise woman, and a very woman with a lot of fortitude. And I think she also sets a kind of example for the generations that were to follow. I think she remarked toward the end of her life that the posterity would not be able to really appreciate, in some sense, the great sacrifices that were made by that founding generation. And she knew very well about those sacrifices through her own experiences with her children and working at the farm and taking care of so many things with her many talents, while John Adams was taking part in efforts to found the country far away. And I think that her contribution, both intellectually in her letters and in her advice to her husband, and in her example, are something that those are things I really admire about her.
It's hard to pick out any one hero. James Madison has always been one of my favorites because I always felt that he understood almost better than anyone what he needed to do when he came into the Constitutional Convention. You come prepared with a document in writing. You may not get 100%, but you will probably get close to 90%. So in terms of his own approach, that you come prepared when you're going into a meeting, that was a procedural issue on his part, planning. But his whole approach to the Bill of Rights I always truly admired, because his notion was opposite what has happened in recent years, as many countries around the world have adopted bills of positive rights, and his were all negative rights, what the government could not be allowed to do. And this was his insightful way of addressing the issues raised by the Anti-Federalists.